But now we're to intangible assets, as opposed to our, plant assets and our natural resources. Now we're talking about intangibles. These are things that have no physical substance, okay? They're not financial assets. Financial assets would be things like accounts receivable, investments. Those are not intangible assets, those are financial assets. Our intangible assets are basically what we would call rights and privileges. So what does that mean? Rights and privileges could be things like we've got a patent that gives us the right to, make something. Copyrights, trademarks, trade names, brand names, and franchises, various licensing arrangements. These are all intangible assets. It can also be things like process knowledge and customer lists and trained and highly skilled workforce. They're generally referred to as amorphous, okay? They can't really be bought and sold individually. Well, some of them can, like patents, but some of the process knowledge and the highly skilled and trained workforce, things like that cannot. So they're different from physical, or what you would call tangible assets, in a couple of ways. If you think about a truck, which is a tangible asset, one person can use it at a time. You can only have one person driving the truck. Where with an intangible asset, you can have everybody using it at once with no problem. And the more a truck is used, the more it's going to wear out. But the more an intangible asset is used, probably the more valuable it becomes. So they're different in a couple of fundamental ways. So I always kind of think about intangible assets like, it's kind of like having an invisible friend. How important could it be? It's not even really real, it's intangible, But when you look at companies that consistently make money and have, solid profits over time, the difference between them and companies that don't is generally the intangible assets. You can have two companies who have the same buildings, the same plant and equipment, the same number of people working for them, but you can have one company earning about 20 times as much as the other one because they've got that highly skilled workforce. They've got a really great process knowledge. All kinds of things like that make the difference. I'm not going to write down the numbers on this, but if you compare what's called the market capitalization, that's what people are willing to pay for a company on the stock market. So if you took the number of shares of Microsoft that are, that are outstanding, and you multiply it times the market value per share, you get a pretty big number. And then if you compare that to the net assets of the company, that would be their assets minus their liabilities, that would be their net assets, you'd find that the market capitalization was way higher. Okay, in other words, and so the difference between the net assets of a company and what people are willing to pay for it, could be construed as, that's kind of the goodwill. Okay, now in accounting for goodwill, we don't account for goodwill unless one company buys another company, and I'm going to do a separate video on that. But I just want to say that these intangible assets are a significant part of how well a company does. Okay, so if we're accounting for intangible assets, they're going to come on their books on the books at their cost if they were purchased. If they were not purchased, all the costs are expensed. All the costs of developing them are expensed. So if you've got a company that internally develops a patent, all the costs of figuring out the patent and all of that, they just get expensed. The only costs that can get capitalized for internally developed patents would be like the legal and registration costs of getting the patent registered. That, and then with the a patent, or we're going to be allocating the cost over the useful life, as we do with, you know, our natural resources and we do with our planned assets. But with intangible assets, we're going to use what's called amortization. Amortization. So we're going to have amortization expense to allocate the cost over the useful life. So we've got depreciation for planned assets, depletion for natural resources, and amortization for our intangible assets. Okay. All right, so let's look at a few specific ones here. So patents, they have a, we're going to amortize them over their legal life or their useful life, whichever is less. So if a patent has a legal life of 20 years, which is the general legal life of a patent, but your marketing department says, yeah, this is only going to be a thing for 5 years, you can only amortize it over 5 years, because that's the amount of time that that patent is going to be providing economic benefit to you. Okay? So it's, if the whatever product it was going to last for 50 years, you could still only amortize it over 20 years, because that's when the legal life of the patent ends. So with a patent, it's 20 years or the useful life, whichever is less. Okay? Copyrights are different. They're generally the life of the creator plus 70 years. So that's how long you can amortize that over. Franchises and licenses are by contract, so they would have a certain you know, contract date that they would expire. And then other things like trademarks and trade names are considered to have indefinite lives, because they can be renewed basically forever. So if something has an unlimited life, we obviously can't amortize it. Okay? If something has a limited life, that's where we take the amortization expense over its useful life. And we use the straight line method, which there's usually no residual value. That's the only difference. So you're taking the useful life and you're taking the cost of the asset and basically dividing it by the estimated useful life. Okay? Or the legal life, whichever is less. Okay. All right, I don't want to forget that detail. Okay, so we talked a little bit about patents and copyrights, trademarks and trade names I did mention. And, oh, the main thing that you have to remember, or one main thing in this chapter, is when you see R&D, research and development, okay, so research and development, that is always an expense, okay? So research and development is always an expense. So the best thing to do is to do some of the homework on the intangible assets. Just get familiar with which ones are limited life, which ones are unlimited life. Do some of the amortization problems, and you should be good to go. And next, I'm going to just focus on goodwill and how that comes on the books.